board members, let's go ahead and dive into the first part of this puzzle that we need to tackle, which is all about understanding and making sure that we have a clear grasp as to what the ideal board composition that we're looking for. So the first step in recruiting is to start being strategic about who it is that we're adding to our board and for what reasons. So let's start off by reviewing the ideal charter school board composition. With this, what we're trying to do is we're trying to answer for our board, for each individual governance board, these questions. Do we have the right people in the right seats? Do we have the right board members serving? Do we have the right number of board members in order to accomplish all of the complex work that we need to accomplish as a governing board? And are we building a sustainable team? So what we often find is a pitfall that boards fall into is that they're crystal clear about what it is that they need today, and they've recruited a strong board for today. But without constant care and attention, even going a full year without putting an emphasis on recruiting can lead to the position where you're actually deficient in this area, where you might have board members rolling off and not being replaced, the size of your board shrinks, you start to become more desperate to get people in those seats. So you want to make sure that not only do you have the right people in the right seats, but that you're building a sustainable pipeline of board members. And this is really where it becomes a bit of a puzzle, because what you're trying to accomplish, right, like I discussed, is making sure that you've got enough board members to run your organization today, but that you're constantly making sure, how do we put together new board members to create this essentially a puzzle? What pieces do we need to put together in order to make the picture that we're trying to have? So what is it that we're aiming for? One of the things that I always like to start with almost any presentation, whether it's reviewing recruiting for a strong, diverse, and strategic board, or talking about things like the goals and how boards actually accomplish their work, I like to start out with this slide that really highlights just how important the role is of a governing board. We often have this misconception out there that a charter school board is something that is akin to a collection of well-meaning people that, of course, are here to run this really great school. And while that is true, right, we are, as governing board members, a collection of well-meaning people. Really want to encourage you all as board members and as school leaders to think of your board as something more strategic and professional. So your charter school board should really be a highly effective team that's been strategically assembled to bring the skills, expertise, temperament, and time to govern a multi-million-dollar public enterprise. The reason why this is so important to highlight is for that sentence, the last part of that sentence. Governing a multi-million-dollar public enterprise. This is a really big deal, right? When we say this presentation in live trainings, I love to see the heads bob in the audience as they internalize the fact that they are essentially on the board of directors of a multi-million-dollar business. And that is a really great way of giving this, setting the stage and giving this presentation the gravitas that it deserves, which is to really consider this not just a part-time job where we're all going to show up and do our best, but really really internalizing the fact that this is a professional job where the outcomes are students' education and their minds. And so not every student, hopefully most students will only get one shot at, say, 5th grade, and we want to make sure that they have the best experience possible. And so framing this conversation by noting that when you are recruiting your board, that we aren't just recruiting people because they care about our organization, but that we're recruiting people and having them join our board because they've been strategically assembled, again, with the skills, expertise, temperament, and time to govern this multi-million-dollar enterprise. So let's drill down a little bit more. When we talk about the board composition and we talk about having the right people on our team or having the right people on our bus, we got to talk about how big should our team or how big should our bus be. So in order to do that, I want to start out by explaining how we arrive at this number down here at the bottom of 9 to 11 board members. We talk a lot about how boards are at their best when they've got a teams of committees that are able to take the work that the board is trying to accomplish, drill down into the weeds, and actually carry the ball forward in between those regularly scheduled monthly board meetings. As someone who's had the ability and the occasion to work with lots of boards in my position, I can tell you that the thing that they get wrong the most, the boards that are least effective, are those that have really great aspirations, but they don't set their board up and they don't structure their board in order to make those things a success. So they may set goals in the summer and then they meet to talk about those at the very first meeting, but in their capacity as a full board, they don't have the time or the resources to actually move the needle on any of these key areas. So if you've got committees in order to make your work effective, then you've got to make sure that you've got enough people to staff those committees. So here are the core 5 committees that we recommend for every charter school board are the governance committee, the finance committee, your development or fundraising committee, the academic excellence committee, and your CEO or school leader support and evaluation committee. Those are the 5 committees we find that most boards need in order to keep their eye on all of the different bouncing balls and actually to be able to show progress when they reflect at the end of the year on what they were able to accomplish. If you take those those core committees and assume that every once in a while you might have a task force or other work that pops up, say for example, if you're looking to buy a new school building or build a new school building, you may have a facilities task force that pops up. Our general advice when you're structuring your board is that for each one of these committees, you really need to identify a minimum of 3 people per committee in order to make this work effective. So how do we get to that? Well, we also give advice that trustees should try as best as they can to only serve on one committee. Why are these 2 points about having 3 people per committee and only serving on one committee so important? Well, like I said, there is a lot of work that a really high-achieving charter school board needs to accomplish. Having at least 3 people on a committee is the minimum amount that you really need in order to have enough people to have to be able to have a functioning committee. So typically, what we'll see is a committee that's made up of 1 staff person, perhaps from your organization, and then 1 or 2 board members. We try to have board members serving on only 1 committee because the quickest thing that leads to burnout of your really high achieving board members is by asking too much of them. So what we tend to find, as is true in a lot of areas in life, is your highest achieving board members, your best board members, the ones you need the most, are the ones who are going to be willing to do good work. And so you're going to ask them and you're going to come to rely on them to help structure and move the needle with your committees. So just by that very nature, they're going to be asked to do more work, which could potentially lead to burnout and getting to the point where that person is going to step off of the board. So what you want to be able to is acknowledge that sometimes your hardest working board members are going to quickly become the board members who burn out first. And that is going to be problematic. Not only do you have to replace a board member, but you have to replace possibly one of your hardest working board members. So given all of this, typically what we recommend is somewhere in between 9 to 11 board members. Anything fewer than that, if you have 5 board members or anything fewer than that, it's really impossible to get all of this work done that a charter school board needs to accomplish. And then similarly, when you get beyond the point of 11, when you get to 13, 15 board members or even more, and I apologize, as happens when you record live webinars, there happens to be a siren that decided to join us in the background. So I'm just going to give a moment for this truck to pass. All right, apologize for that. As I was saying, when you get beyond 11, so when you get to boards that are the size of 13, 15, and even larger boards than that, what we tend to find is that you quickly hit the point of diminishing returns. So especially as most charter schools are, they're sort of building the airplane as they fly it, right? They're putting together this board as they're establishing their organization. So most boards don't have the institutional processes and guardrails in place to effectively manage and incorporate the work of, say, 15 board members. What we find is that the efforts it takes in order to wrangle those board members and to make sure you've got quorum for your meetings, it ends up being more work than it ends up being value. So I'd like to encourage you to think when you're putting together your board composition is identifying the exact size that you want for your board. And again, the constant theme you're going to hear is that your form of your board should follow its function. So you should ask what it is that we need to do for as a board, and the size of your board should reflect the specific characteristics of your organization at this point in its life cycle. So if you're a brand new organization, 11 people might be too overwhelming. Similarly, if you've been around for 10 or 15 years and you've got a well-oiled machine, anything fewer than 11 might find that it's too much work for those individuals to take on. To that point, here's a little snapshot of what we often see as a way that boards scale up the size and evolve over time. So as you can see over here on the left, during those charter application days and years when you're taking this idea of creating a school out of thin air and making it realistic, this is usually the time when the work is being done by what we call committee of the whole. So you don't have actual committees that are separate and distinct from the board that meet on a monthly basis and report up to the board. Usually what we find are that these are 5 to 7 people who are really passionate about what they're doing, and they're sitting around a dinner table and they're eating pizza and they're writing the sections of their charter, or they're building out their bylaws, that kind of stuff. 5 to 7 board members is fine for that, right? Because you need it to be manageable when you don't really have the structures in place of a full school. As I said before, though, 5 to 7 is a pretty small size board. So once you go doors open in your initial governing board, maybe you already have your charter, you may be organized already as a non-organized nonprofit. At this point, you may be introducing slowly the notion of committee work being accomplished. Typically we see that people phase in committees 1 or 2 at a time. So in these early years, we would expect that you start to methodically expand your board size from something more moderate like 7 to something more like 9 to 11 board members. As I said, as you become a really well-oiled machine and you've got infrastructure in place and you're relying on less of a lean staff and you might have some support from your management team, at this point you can consider how you can expand your board to 11 to 15 board members with a full complement of committees that are sort of humming on all cylinders, and that we're able to fold the work into those board members and actually put them to work in place. So you're not actually creating more work for the board, but you're actually deploying these new board members in the best way possible. So as you can see, this goes back to the point I made at the beginning. These 2 questions: do we have the right people in the right seats, and are we building a sustainable team? So again, the 2 pieces of the 2 moving targets here that you need to address are: do we have the right board members? Have we already recruited the right board members for what we need today? And then also, are we accounting for in the future not only board members rolling off in terms expiring, but also are we making sure that we're recruiting enough people to be able to expand, so that we're not constantly just replacing the people who are rolling off, but that we're actually able to net gain new board members to get up to 11 to that larger size team. All right, so now that we've got the size of our team and we're going to have this discussion about where we are today in our life cycle and how many board members we need, the next thing is to think, well, what skill sets do we need on our team? If you recall back, one of the things that we as a governing board need to do, that we're responsible for, is maintaining a pipeline of fellow board members. As you can see here, one of the core functions of a governing board is to assemble the right skills, expertise, temperament, and time to govern this organization. So that means we need to identify what types of skills and expertise we're recruiting for, not what skills and expertise are coming and knocking down the door and volunteering to be a part of our board. So what skills are we talking about? Here are the core skills and expertise that we find are needed to govern a multi-million-dollar public organization. What you'll see here is that there's a diverse set of backgrounds and skills that we're looking for on a board. Why? Because there are so many complex responsibilities of a governing board that dip into and require expertise from all of these different areas. So let's start off right at the top. Finance. Every board must have somebody who is financially savvy on the board. We love to see accountants, people with school finance experience, people who understand school, specifically charter school financing, business leaders, anybody who can really effectively understand budget to actuals, can understand the complexities of financial oversight, and can understand an audit. That is an absolute critical skill because it gets to the heart of what it means to be on a school board. And that finance experience is so important because it gets to the heart of what we're here for as a governing board, which is ultimately uh, the accountability of the organization. So you want to make sure that financial accountability, being able to keep the lights on, is something important. When it comes to facilities, it's really important that you have somebody, again, who understands facilities financing, real estate, contracting, architecture. Those kind of skills are really important because what's unique about charter schools is that oftentimes they do not come with a school building. Unlike a traditional district K through 12 board or most other schools out there that already have a building, some of you out there are maybe responsible for finding your own facilities and managing your own facilities. So if that's the case, then you need to make sure that you're planning in the budgetary resources to maintaining it or to actually acquiring a building. So having somebody with that kind of experience is really important. Legal experience is another one of those areas where every governing board needs to make sure that they have representation. Why is this so important? Well, having a lawyer on the board is important not because they're going to be the lawyer or the legal representation for the organization or for the board, but because it comes with a certain valuable mindset. Having the attorney on the board is going to be a great person to analyze policies and plans a little bit different frame of mind. Another thing is that they know they can pay attention to some of those red flags where it's appropriate to pause and take slow next steps. So, for example, if you're dealing with an issue where you may be wondering whether it's appropriate to go out and invest in outside legal counsel to provide advice, it's great to have an attorney there who can help guide the board to that decision. So, again, having a lawyer on the board is really one of the core skills or backgrounds or professional expertise that we would look to. But again, they're not going to be the legal representative or the legal counsel for the organization or for the board. HR personnel experience is so important. Again, why? Because we've got such a huge human capital pipeline that we're dealing with all of the teaching and staff members who are coming through the organization. One of the things that the board is going to do is they're going to set goals related to staffing levels. And it's incumbent upon the board to make sure that they have the financial capabilities of offering benefits and compensation in such a way that they attract the right board member, the right staff. If you're part of a district instrumentality, maybe you don't have the same human capital pipeline questions, but one of the things you're going to have to do is partner and have a very strong relationship with your lead teacher. And again, one of the core functions of a governing board with relation to that lead teacher is doing an end of the year evaluation. And anybody with HR personnel experience is probably going to be able to offer some really valuable advice when it comes to doing that employee evaluation of your school leader. Another area that we see especially unique and is especially important for charter school boards is when it comes to the area of fundraising. Again, many charter schools out there have very unique missions and purposes that require additional funding beyond the allocation that comes that follows the student. So if that's the case, it's incumbent upon the board to make sure that they're developing, in conjunction with the staff of the organization, a realistic fundraising plan. Having somebody on your board who has done this before and understands not just institutional grants and those kind of applications for funding, but also knows how to ask for personal contributions and has a network of individuals. When it comes to fundraising, a great type of person to recruit is someone who maybe worked in the development or alumni affairs office at a local college or university. They tend to be they tend to be professionals and experts at things like fundraising and promoting the image of your organization in the community. You'll see that's coming. Some of you may be surprised to see so far down on this list is education experience. You'll see here that I specifically say that you want education, but not too narrow of a focus. Why is this so important? Well, this whole notion of shared governance that we're talking about here with having a governing board and the school leadership the reason why this exists is because we ask lay people to represent the community and the broader tax base on these governing boards. So the way that we make this a success is by taking these group of laypersons with a diverse set of professional backgrounds and having them partner with education experts to execute on the vision that they set. So while it's critically important that you have somebody on your team and that you have people on your team who understand the pedagogy of your organization, they understand different instructional design methods, they understand how interim testing works and how to move the needle on the accountability metrics. But what you do not want is a board made up of either retired school leaders or teachers, because again, that will be too narrow of a focus. What we want the wealth of valuable contributions that comes from diverse backgrounds and experiences, and pairing that with educational experts to make this thing happen. And then lastly on here is previous governance experience. Having somebody on your team who understands the role of a governing board, again, whether it be on a charter school board or on a charitable nonprofit, maybe a hospital board or a corporate board, someone who understands the notion of shared governance and how boards work and speak together with one voice. So how boards reach a consensus, speak with one voice to effectuate their vision of excellence that they've set. Those are the skills and expertise that are most important. But on the other side of this coin is not just the professional backgrounds and skills and expertise they bring, but some of those softer skills and diversity considerations. So as we can see when we go back to our definition of a charter school board, it's not just about the skills and expertise, but it's also about the temperament and time that's required to govern this organization. So as I've said before, serving on a public charter school board is one of those unique opportunities where it's a part-time job where you actually get to select who your coworkers and teammates are going to be. So it's important that you don't waste this opportunity to consider these softer skills. Do they have an entrepreneurial mindset? Think about what this organization is, right? Charter schools are inherently entrepreneurial because they're taking an organization that didn't exist before and they're pulling it out of thin air. Having somebody on your team who's aligned with what it means to have this entrepreneurial mindset is critical. Do they have a sense of humor? Is it someone you can work with day to day? Of course, are they aligned with your mission, right? Charter schools are usually created for very specific reasons because they fill an unmet need in the educational space in your community. Having someone who's aligned with that mission is key. Going back to the talk about time, this is a part-time job, and but it's not an insignificant time commitment, right? Each board and organization is different, but at a minimum, it typically entails one monthly board meeting that's usually a couple hours long. In addition, you'll likely be asked to serve on committees or to serve in another capacity. So making sure that somebody has the time to actually commit to not only attending meetings, but to accomplish all the follow-up work is key as well. When it comes to the group processes, are these people who understand what it means to be on a team? Are they only capable to work as a solo person out there, or are they able to understand how to reach a group consensus and speak with one voice? Those are all things you want to be considering in addition to the professional expertise. And again, another thing that's incumbent upon the board is when it comes to recruiting a strong board is to make sure that they've got a diverse board. So when you're thinking about the demographics of your board, you want to consider the ethnic makeup, the gender makeup. You want to think about the age. Are all of your board members older board members? It's great to have a mix of millennials in there as well. It's great to have board members who have different expertise in education, right? So having things like your geography, making sure that you're recruiting people who are part of the community. Considering all of the diverse considerations are important. You want to make sure that your board represents the community you're serving, the broader tax base, the students you're serving. Really, again, it's incumbent upon the board to make sure that they're being intentional in recruiting the board that they want. So when it comes to actually having these conversations about who it is that we need, what size board, and how we're going to able to go out and recruit, it's important, as you heard me say, that your form should follow your functions. And that brings us to the role of a governance committee. I know it sounds duplicative, but every one of our governance boards needs to have what we call a governance committee. Really, the role of a governance committee is primarily to make sure that we've got a healthy governing board. So really, the overall health of the board is within their purview. So included in that are things like board composition, developing a diverse board. So the things that we've talked about already today, about board composition, and then the steps that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes, all about recruiting, nominating, and getting those new board members oriented. In addition, we want to make sure that the governance committee has a clear set of roles and responsibilities, right? Both for the full board, for the committees, and for the individual trustees. That's one of the core functions of a governing board, of a governance committee. And what's so important here is we use that individual trustee job description in order to aid us in our recruitment efforts. So as you'll see as part of this module, one of the things that we've included is an individual trustee job description. The purpose for that is for you and your team to outline the specific roles and responsibilities of an individual board member. This is going to be one of the best tools that you can use when you go out to start recruiting, is to actually be able to post this position just like any other part-time job. For those of you who've gone on to any of the job boards recently, you may have noticed that one of the things you'll see pretty frequently are volunteer board member positions. So that's the role of the governance committee. And then in addition to that, board orientation and education, making sure that the board members are professionally developed and understanding their roles and responsibilities. And then included here down at the bottom is another part of this, which is succession planning for your team, so for your officers and the CEO. So this gets beyond just the role of the governance committee as it relates to putting together a strong strategically recruited board. But what's important to note here is that core to the function of the success of the board is a governance committee keeping their eyes on all of these things. So where are you going to go from here? Well, the next thing you want to ask yourself is, does your board have a functioning governance committee? If it does not, I want you to review the PDF that's attached here in the model, and you're going to use that to develop your own job description of a governance committee. If you don't have this committee, the best way, like I said, to start off by implementing a committee is to start with the written approved description, ask your board to vote to adopt it, and that is the charge for your committee to go out and start doing this work. Next thing we want to talk about is, does your board have the right composition? This is going to be the governance committee's function, is to have this conversation. So think about your ideal composition. Answer this question about, do you have the right size of your board today, and who is it that you're going to need going forward? And then lastly, you want to make sure you have the tools to be successful. So in addition to having the governance committee in existence and doing all of these things, you want to make sure that you have that job description written up and approved so that you can be crystal clear with prospective candidates to your board as to what it means to serve on your board. We'll be talking about those more in just a few minutes.